Welcome, everybody. My name is Carolyn Lowell. I'm Chief Content Officer at OrthoWorld, and I'm honored to be with you this morning and to welcome you to our session, Leverage the Latest in 3D Printing to Speed Time to Market. I will be moderating this session, and joining me are three panelists who were involved in bringing the INHANCE Shoulder System to life. Russell Parrott is CTO of Ignite Orthopedics, a Warsaw, Indiana-based company that works in close collaboration with physician partners to develop solutions for the unmet clinical and economic needs of the orthopedic market. He has been in the orthopedic industry since 2003 with experience in R&D, including product development engineering, project management, process validation engineering, and materials research engineering. At Ignite, Russ has led the team in obtaining 10 FDA 510K clearances. Drew Miller is a project lead in R&D innovation and partnership at Johnson & Johnson MedTech Surgery, driving cross-sector collaborations that integrate medical devices with pharmaceutical innovations. Previously, he was a project manager and R&D engineer at J&J MedTech Orthopedics, specializing in shoulder joint reconstruction. He has contributed to global product launches in the US, Europe, Japan, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada, amongst others. And Liz Wiederhold serves as the serves as the Senior Program Manager for Product Development at Paragon Medical. Prior to joining Paragon Medical, Liz worked at DePuy Synthes, serving as a development engineer in upper extremities and a project management role in joint reconstruction, focusing on knee R&D programs. During this time, she held responsibility for many critical programs, including the development and launch of several additively manufactured implants in the Attune product portfolio. So please join me in welcoming our panelists. So during this discussion today, we are going to talk about the how and why additive manufacturing allowed the broader team to speed time to market and really help scale the enhanced product line. And we also plan to talk about lessons for success in collaboration between a large strategic as well as a product development firm and a contract manufacturer. So our aim is to provide an example of how additive manufacturing really can be leveraged to enhance design and make for a more efficient manufacturing process, and leave you with some advice on how you can work with your network as you go forth and design and manufacture additively manufactured devices. So we will leave some time at the end for questions. If you have anything as we go through the discussion, write it down and we'll make sure to answer questions at the end. To start the conversation though, I would really like each of them to just briefly share, because we will be talking about INHANCE quite a bit. Just what was your role in the product portfolio? Do you want to go first, Russ?
Sure, yeah.
Okay.
So Ignite's a product development company. We identify a market need and then create a surgeon team and then work closely with those physician partners to push the boundaries of innovation. And Ignite developed the world's first shoulder system, fully integrated shoulder system that included additive manufacturing throughout its entire scope. As CTO of the company, I oversaw product development, but then I also led our US regulatory submissions and worked through the product transfer process verification. That's what kept me close with Drew and the Paragon team throughout that process.
Yeah, so first off, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. So I was the project manager and one of the R&D engineers working on the INHANCE portfolio. So I partnered closely with Russ to bring that new and novel technology into our J&J ecosystem. And as part of that, we were working through the cross-functional verification, validation, manufacturing transfer of these new and novel technologies to make sure that we could take it to market in a streamlined and efficient fashion.
Liz?
I had a bit of an interesting start. So at the time that J&J started working with Ignite to bring INHANCE into the company, I was actually still at J&J. I was leading other additively manufactured programs within the knee division. So Drew and I were constantly comparing notes on how things were going and what we could do differently across our two teams. And then since then, I've transitioned into a role at Paragon. So I've been able to be a part of the downstream process, seeing how Ignite and J&J have really partnered to launch with Paragon the INHANCE system. So got to see both sides of the coin.
Great, thank you. Russ, what were some of the key factors, maybe both technical and business strategic, that you considered when you were determining whether additive manufacturing was the appropriate method for the INHANCE system?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that the enhanced system's a fully integrated shoulder system, and really what I meant by that was that the designs are such that it allows the surgeons to seamlessly transition from a stemless design to a stemmed implant, or from a reverse shoulder system to an anatomic to a reverse. And to do that, you required some really complex designs, and additive manufacturing was the technology that allowed us to do that today. So additive manufacturing also allowed for a few other innovations that I've got some slides on. I'll go through here. But the real, like the first thing that we looked at was on the humeral side. In order to implant the stemless along the resected neck of the humerus, perpendicular to it, and then the stem the same way, we needed the same proximal bodies on those stems. And we had windows in those proximal bodies that allow for bony ingrowth into a porous surface, which you wouldn't be able to do without additive manufacturing. So if you didn't have additive, you would not be able to plasma spray those surfaces and keep a consistent surface thickness, or maybe even reach those regions. Diffusion bonding would be very difficult to keep the strength of the component. So additive manufacturing was really what made this system flexible and be able to provide that bony ingrowth in those regions. You don't see it here, but the stemless component is on the far right implanted, and you see bone growing up through those windows. Okay, so that if you implant a stem, it looks exactly the same. We're able to keep all that bone in the proximal humerus for that bony ingrowth, which provides rotational stability, whereas other implants, similar implants, would bowl out that whole proximal humerus, remove that bone, which reduces the rotational stability of the implant. Those windows also allow for, if there's a revision case, for an osteotome to come through and ease revision. So that was one advantage from additive that we wanted to use. On the stemmed implants, we also found, this is later in the process, so this didn't really relate to how we selected the additive process, but we learned that you could easily add product identifiers. So we have the size on the implant labeled small, medium, large. We have numbers and lines on that implant for virtually free. We're putting those on there with little added cost. It would be basically impossible to do otherwise. Add a coding around those numbers otherwise. We are also able to print in suture holes, which, unlike subtractive manufacturing, it's actually a cost reduction as you're removing material. So it's kind of it's a shift in the mindset on how you develop product. Removing features actually saves in costs, so it's different. But those are some of the things that we learned. We also have hidden support structures underneath this. We have solid walls around all the suture holes. We have in some products, I'll switch to the next slide. In some products, like this reverse base plate, we have struts going down the walls around that post to increase resistance to torque, to allow a lot of torque to be applied while inserting. So those are hidden support features. We have printed threads. We have printed cutting features on the screw, so you don't have to grind in any of those features to allow for the self-drilling, self-tapping. And we even printed threads around the collar of the device, poking out of the lattice structure, which again you would not be able to do with any other technology. So additive manufacturing really allows for these improvements in fixation. And then the other thing with the additive manufacturing is that you can print a lattice structure. This probably, I probably should have brought this up earlier, but like you can print a lattice structure directly on to the device that's tailored for the bone that you're implanting into. And that reduces the risk of shedding, and it also keeps the material strength because you're not sintering your device afterwards for a trabecular metal structure or something like that. So there's some real advantages with additive manufacturing in that way. Just to talk about the capabilities of additive manufacturing, go back to the first slide we had. There's a device, our hybrid glenoid, the post that's on that small polymer piece. There's a metal post sticking out the back side of that. That is a printed lattice on a very thin shell, and then on the inside of that shell, there's another lattice, a little bit larger lattice, that allows for direct compression of a polyethylene into that lattice. So like it interdigitates into that lattice structure. And by doing that, you significantly increase the strength of that connection. And there's our competitors don't, they were doing mechanical connections. Some have switched to this type of connection, but they saw disassociation between that post and the polymer. So there's a significant advantage there. And the precision of the manufacturing technology that we're using for that additive component is so good that we're actually direct compression molding around, like we're using that to seal in the mold tool and not getting a ton of flash, which is something that was maybe a little risky to attempt, but we do that without any post machining around that. So it's I think that just talks to the real advantages and where we're at with additive today.
Thanks. Drew, from J&J's standpoint, what considerations do you evaluate when deciding if additive manufacturing is suitable for a particular implant or component, and then how do you vet manufacturing partners?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I think talking a little bit on the features that Russ was pointing out in our implant system, like there's a lot of those conversations when it comes to manufacturing technologies that happen very organically. There is, lattice features that we knew we wanted integrated into the implant system, not a post-process that we added onto an otherwise manufactured implant. So those conversations, those features, those benefits that you're incorporating into your system happen very organically. And we know that we are going to be seeking a supplier or a partner that has this technology within their wheelhouse. There's other design features or other, when we're vetting partners where those conversations happen a little bit more inorganically. We have an idea of how we might want to manufacture this. We know the features, we know the benefits that we want to incorporate, but we're really looking for that strategic partner to kind of come with us on that ride and lend their own suggestions for saying, here are ways that you could improve this manufacturing process, or here's the ways that you could change this to maybe reduce your costs or incorporate, different features and benefits. And I think like leveraging suppliers for economic layouts, leveraging suppliers for different build parameters, things like that. That's somewhere where we would look and leverage some of our partners in those collaborations. When we talk about like evaluating suppliers, I think from my personal perspective, it starts off at like core competency. If we look at INHANCE as a portfolio example, we have additively manufactured components. We have traditionally subtractive manufactured components. We have molded. We have the whole gamut of manufacturing processes there. So I am looking for, or I guess I bet manufacturers based on their breadth of experience and what manufacturing capabilities they can bring to the table to help us push our complex programs forward. There's other variables that we'll consider, like proven experience with similar programs, or like that rapport that a supplier can bring to the table. Orthopedics is a relatively small community, so I think I look out and I see I know a handful of people here. So going with suppliers that you're comfortable with, people you've worked with, people who you have connections with is helpful when you're vetting those suppliers. And then something I think that is maybe underscored is like the infrastructure to support the product that we are developing. So not only can you help us through the design process, but after launch you can help us with scalability through that, and then you can help us with the post care of that product as well throughout the lifetime of the implant. And then general criteria: quality, compliance, responsiveness, cost structure, those generic deliverables that you're looking for from any type of manufacturer.
Great. And Liz, I know Paragon Medical's additive program was really built sort of on this partnership or started with this partnership. So how did this partnership allow you to, begin to scale your additive manufacturing capabilities?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple things there. So I'll try to touch on all of them. But, really it was the openness and the collaboration between both Ignite and J&J and coming to the table with Paragon, being fully transparent on what the need was, what the future looked like, so that Paragon could make the investments that they needed to make and scale appropriately. I think, conservatively, Paragon went from first printer landed to entirely new building built, dedicated to additive manufacturing within 2 years with the support of this program. So Paragon, for those who don't know, we have a dedicated innovation center in our Warsaw, Indiana location. That building is fully dedicated to mimicking our production facilities. So they've kind of got one of every type of machine. And then on top of that, they then use that site to bring in our first 3D printers. So the process was developed there. The first printers were validated while we were building a brand new building for additive manufacturing. So that innovation center is 100% dedicated to prototyping. And at the same time, we then brought HIP in-house, which is the largest capital investment that Paragon has ever made. So we were able to, get updated files from Russ and his team, have them on the printers that day because we weren't having to break into a production schedule, and then move them 10 feet to different types of machining equipment to figure out the best way to do the secondary post-ops. At that time, finding a manufacturing partner that was both focused on additive and secondary machining was very difficult to find. I think there's been a lot of organic growth across the industry since then, but being able to receive a file, print parts, move them over to 3 different machines to try out different machining methods, different holding methods, and then deliver them to Russ and his team for labs by the end of the week, including HIP, was pretty significant to speed up the time to market.
Great. Thank you for that introduction. What are some of the developments, what were some of the development and manufacturing barriers that you had to work through together? Maybe Russ, I'll start with you.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the material issues were covered by good control with powder reuse and oxygen content and moisture reduction, things like that. So we didn't see a lot in material related issues, but the issues that we saw mostly were with like our initial builds. Just about every build that we had, we'd have to go through some development process to make sure that we had the right lattice structures or the right support structures, the correct orientation of the part, things like that, to make sure that we weren't getting thermal deformation, that the product was supported well enough that we were keeping the dimensional stability of the product. And the most challenging, like good example that I can think of, the most challenging device was our long stem. And initially we had printed the long stem's up here, but it's not a great image for this conversation. You can see like it's our longest stem's 155 millimeters long, or 195 millimeters long, so it's pretty long. And it so to extend at this 45-degree angle, we had to put a ton of support structure on it to keep it from drooping or bowing. And in doing that, you're adding a lot of material. You're taking up a lot of space on the build plate, and your costs are going to go sky high for a big device like that in it. And so, working with Paragon, they identified a new way to machine the device and tip it straight up. And as we built the product in its vertical orientation, we could put more product on the plate and keep that cost down and make it something that additive manufacturing could address. I mean, cost is still a concern with additive manufacturing. I know that's kind of why you're seeing a lot of the spinal devices or smaller devices being printed with additive. These long stems were a significant challenge. One of the other things that we did at that time is we changed the layer thickness of the component. So we went from a 30 micron to a 60 micron layer thickness. That's a recommendation actually with our partners at 3D Systems that had recommended that really helped reduce the time duration and kept us within that validation window on printing these products. So those are some of the challenges we went through, some of the things that we learned, and now I'm trying to implement on future products.
Drew, is there anything you would add?
Yeah, I'm not sure what Russ is talking about. We had no issues whatsoever, flying colors, no problems at all in the program. Kind of keying in on one of the examples that Russ brought up, our stemless devices and our short stem devices, they were originally designed with this Jacobs chuck on the backside. And the intent was that it would be printed with the device, and then as it went through the manufacturing process, that would be a very key feature that a downstream supplier would be able to key in on and use that for your turning process, your milling process, whatever we need to do for the post-processing of these implants. So it wasn't necessarily a hurdle, but we found out through the development with our partners at Paragon that that is a feature that was advantageous. We thought it would be advantageous for our downstream suppliers, but they had a differentiated method for fixturing those devices that actually mitigated the need for that specific feature within the design. So that was an area where, not necessarily a barrier, but we were able to take that feedback and incorporate that into our standard stem lengths and our long stem lengths, where that's effectively a feature that we no longer need. We're saving on build time, we're saving on build orientation, less material. Russ alluded to that removing material from the build actually saves you money. This was an example where we were able to implement that throughout the development process.
Is there anything else you would add, Liz?
Yeah, so Russ and Drew talked a lot on the manufacturing process, so how the stem was changed in orientation and just the different features that were added to help make it more machinable, but we were also chasing the dimensional issues that Russ mentioned. Not sure if anybody in the crowd is familiar with trying to measure an additively manufactured product, especially on traditional CMM. It's not the easiest, especially with the as-built surface. So we needed some other ways to also get more dimensional feedback. So again, that's where Paragon, we already had a blue light scanner that could, in seconds capture the external geometry and create a mesh to then compare back to the original model to see what kind of deformation had happened throughout the printing and hipping process. But we also then invested in some micro CT technology so we could take a look on the inside as well to be able to give feedback to our partners. So just, walking through this journey together and finding, facing challenges and finding solutions to overcome them.
And how have you applied some of your lessons learned to newer initiatives since then? You can start, Russ.
Yeah, so the thing that Drew was talking about with the being able to fixture to the Jacobs chuck, we thought when we were first printing, we thought this was a really good idea to keep machine costs down post-process, to have a chuck that's basically concentric with our face of the implant that could allow the implant to spin and machine the tapers. And that worked when we were working with Paragon in Aurora, and that product changed to Paragon in Dayton, and those machines really didn't work for that. So I'd say working with your manufacturing, with your contract manufacturer early on, making sure that you're talking to them about how this device is going to be machined and how it's going to be fixtured very early on, so you can build those features into the product is really important. That will really speed up the manufacture of the product. And so that was one lesson learned. The other thing that we're incorporating is that the increased layer thickness, if we can, in products where it can be, where it will allow for it with mechanical strength. And we're also continuing to hide features in the device for additional strength and remove material where we don't need it for reduced cost. Building in, we had this chuck even on the stemless device. We had that. You can remove that completely. You can change your support structure to further reduce materials. You can stack components. Companies are looking at multi-laser machines to further reduce cost on the components. And there's just a lot of new developments, even in the past 7 years that we've been working on this. So
Yeah, I guess leaning into that example a little bit, like, believe it or not, as engineers, we do try to design the implants in a manufacturable way to make it easy for you guys once we hand it to you. I know it doesn't always seem like that, but we try to think through those things. So I think the biggest lesson that I've learned is as you start to implement additive as a more primary manufacturing method, getting involved with that 3D printing manufacturer and your secondary manufacturer earlier on in the process is key so that you can figure out and problem solve and do this scenario planning as a team together and really work through those hurdles. Like as R&D engineers, we understand design, we understand materials, we understand the constraints of the procedure. But when it comes to like the efficiencies around the manufacturing process, we're dangerous in those areas. But we are definitely looking for our suppliers to provide their input to engage in those conversations as well. So having those conversations and involvement at an earlier rate allows you to kind of speed along your initiatives and your time to market.
We learned a lot too along the way. I mean, we weren't perfect. We made suggestions that didn't always work, just like the rest of the team. But the nice part was the partnership, right? So we could make suggestions, try things out quickly. The team came to the table with other suggestions, and it was really a team effort to find solutions to those challenges. And we've learned a lot since then, Paragon internally, that we can apply to future programs to move even faster. So, I think the first couple, we learned a lot and moved forward. And then, Russ, you said 10 different FDA submissions. Those last couple were extremely quick because we have learned so much.
Yeah.
To go back to talking about, scaling or using additive manufacturing to really speed time to market. Liz, can you just talk a little bit about how additive manufacturing really allows you to do that with your partners?
Yeah, so Russ talked a lot about the reasons why additive made the most sense for these products, but setting that to the side for a second, when you look at more traditional manufacturing methods, whether it's castings, forgings, or even traditional machining, you have a lot of setup time and investment that you have to make into those methods. If it's casting or forgings, you have to build tools, you have to produce parts, you have to get them through all of the downstream processes. Even traditional machining, you need to write programs and get things set up, usually on production equipment. And it takes time to produce those parts and get feedback within your product team. With additive, like I shared earlier, we can have a model that day that we can get on our development printers and have something back to the customer by the end of the week with our in-house HIP capabilities. So the time to market and that feedback loop speeds up significantly versus needing to go edit or change a tool or change a program. We don't necessarily need prints to get started. We can start from a model that a design engineer mocked up earlier that day.
Yeah, internal heat treat and internal inspection also, I think, makes a major change, a significant impact on time to market, on time to development. For production, it's a lower cost introduction because it's a toolless process. But also for the development process, even before you're getting into the production phase, additive manufacturing can help quite a bit. So we had, I looked back at our project timeline before this meeting, and we had 5 development labs in 18 months for the INHANCE Shoulder System. And that was with significant design changes between each lab. And most significant, between our second and our third lab, we had, I talked about the implant orientation for the stemless and the stem device. We'd initially developed our stemless device so that it was implanted vertically along the axis of the stem. We were having issues with that, so we completely redesigned our humeral component and all of the associated instruments and 3D printed those components, and 5 weeks later we held a lab. So I don't think that you could do that with a machine component. Certainly it'd be a lot more expensive to do that with machine components. So additive manufacturing there really cut down the lead time on that portion of the project as well. I know additive's known for that and less known for production, but that's just something that was incredible to us. It's something I haven't done as a development engineer when working for other companies, so it was impactful.
Yeah. And I think leaning into that example a little bit further, like you were able to iterate very quickly, you were able to print instruments. 3D printing has, in my view, kind of always been viewed as this complementary process to the development timeline. You know, you can iterate quickly, you can think through new designs, you can get those printed same day and evaluate them. But I think with the transition from this complementary technology to a more primary technology, not only are you iterating on the design, but you're also, you know, kind of as Liz alluded to, you're doing all of that process development up front as well. So what would typically be reserved for your process verification, your process validation activities, you know, after that design transfer phase, a lot of those kind of, you know, unknown unknowns, black clouds that are looming over about what are we going to realize when we start to manufacture this product, a lot of that has been brought forward in your development timeline, and you're figuring out those issues or those constraints as you develop the product. And I think that that compressed timeline, that compressed development lead cycle to getting to, you know, a finished good has helped immensely with time to market and overall timelines.
Either staying on additive or stepping away from additive, just what maybe were some of the keys to really making this collaboration successful? Toss that to you first, Drew.
Yeah, so I think with these collaborative partnerships where you have, you know, strategic like J&J and external manufacturers and external design partners, I think the first and foremost thing that you have to do is have clear alignment on goals, objectives. You know, you're on this journey together, and what are you aspiring to as a team? You know, maybe that goal is 510K clearance. Maybe that goal is, you know, first patient into using the product, or just a standard COGS target or something like that. Like those goals that you're evaluating need to be known and standard throughout the program. I think for Enhance, we were all aligned that we were developing a you know, first of its kind differentiated shoulder system, and you know that had several sub goals, but we were all on board and walking in lockstep and kind of had that as our North Star along the development pipeline. I think the next thing that I look to when you're doing these collaborative partnerships is like the idea of compromise, understanding where you're going to give, where you're not going to give, and understanding that's probably going to have to happen at some point along the process. So you know your non-negotiables, quality of the product, patient safety, thorough design verification. Those things are going to happen. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. But then you can take a step back and you think about, you know, the ways of working, the ways of partnering together, where we're going to look for efficiencies, how we can use our time, energy, effort, dollars, and put those into places where it actually makes a difference. So one key example I can think of with Enhance is that we now have our sterile single-use instrument system, and a lot of those instruments are 3D printed. And I think we made the key strategic decision with those instruments to build them in the exact same manner as we build our implants, when there were potentially other 3D printed technologies that we could have leveraged. And I think that compromise, that give and take, that push and pull, you know, set us up and reduced a lot of our regulatory risk. It reduced a lot of our technical risk, and really gave us a product that we could bring to market efficiently in a very confident and compliant manner. And then I think the other thing with these, you know, partnership programs is just the idea of like developing a team with good judgment, developing a team who knows when to escalate, knows what to escalate, and you know, I think we all had an environment where like polite disagreement was encouraged. And, you know, I can remember back to different calls where Russ and I would, you know, have definitely not a heated argument, but a very thorough and good discussion about why we were doing something and why we were making that decision, or why we were kind of pursuing those different paths. So I think those are all very important things to consider when like you're looking at different collaborative agreements or different collaborative partnerships like this.
And how big was the team at one point? Did you say 80 some people?
Oh goodness,
More than that?
I don't know. I mean, we had probably like 30 people on the J&J team. We had all of you guys at Paragon, which, I mean, you guys probably had another 30 that were supporting us. We had, you know, half a dozen to a dozen different suppliers that we were working with, and then the Ignite team. It was very large. So communication was key when we were working through that.
Is there anything you would add, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, so the product, when we started the product development in 2018, we knew that to reach the greatest number of patients, that we would sell the product to a large orthopedic company. So in that kind of, you made us look to suppliers that were known for high quality, that were on the approved supplier list of the large OEMs. And that really helped speed to market because we were able to develop this product with Paragon, and then transition it very quickly into the DePuy's supply chain organization. So I think selecting partners that have a good reputation for quality is necessary, and working with those through that development process was important early on. And I appreciate Paragon's willingness to take a bet on us. They were not into additive manufacturing. We were interested in it. We kind of saw the promise of it. It's 20% growth till 2030. So, and they recognized that value too, and took that leap. So I think that keeping Ignite, having us work through that manufacturing transfer with DePuy as partners, also provided them dedicated resources to work through that entire process, even as DePuy was having some major hip and knee launches. It kept focus on that project. We had a dedicated team that did nothing else but work on the INHANCE Shoulder System, and in doing so, we were able to reach all of our milestones and get to clearances in a rapid succession. So we were clearing two to three products a year, up until this year. So it's been fast paced.
There was another talk yesterday where they talked about this, and I think it applied to our program as well. We started this, I think we first contacted in like 2018 is when it started, but the R&D team from J&J, the Ignite team, the Paragon team that we were working with, the 80 or so people that we had on the program, for the vast majority of the development timeline, those individuals did not change. So, Russ and I worked together for 4 years launching, the 9 waves of INHANCE that we have on the market now. So it was really, we assigned resources, and those resources were able to remain constant throughout the program. So like the lessons learned were carried from year 1 all the way through year 4. And I don't think that can be understated as we kind of work to launch the system.
I think the other thing I'd add, I'm certainly guilty of it in a past life when I was at DePuy, was, a lot of times when you're working on a development project, you're using quick turn prototype shops by whatever means you can to get parts made. And you're kind of saying like, hold on, let's get to design freeze, and then we'll go find a manufacturing partner, and then we'll engage. Let me get prints done. Let me lock down my designs with the surgeons. And, on this program, Paragon had a seat at the table from the beginning. So we were able to see the changes that were being made from day 1, and throughout the process, we were able to adapt, we were able to change. We weren't blindsided by sudden design changes when, Russ and team came back and said we need to do a complete redesign. We were at the table and able to participate in those discussions to be able to plan appropriately. J&J and Russ at Ignite didn't just show up once the design was frozen and say, okay, we're ready to manufacture. Can you do this? We're able to scale at the right time and at the right pace alongside the team.
We have a few more questions that we can talk about as a panel, but are there any questions that the audience has? We're happy to pass around a microphone.
Hello, thank you so much. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. How would you convince your fellow engineers who aren't totally sold on additive? I mean, I'm sold completely on additive and I'm using it myself at this time. But how would you convince your fellow engineers who are used to subtractive manufacturing methods that this new, additive manufacturing process really is fruitful in just everything, honestly?
Let me take that one.
Yeah, sure. I mean, well, speaking to titanium additive manufacturing, I think when I first started working on a titanium product, I had no experience working on titanium additive manufacturing 8 years ago. And when I started, I was concerned about material strength. I was concerned about process thermal deformation, all these things that I talked about. And now having gone through 10 regulatory clearances with additive manufacturing, it's really not a concern at all. It's the material properties that we get are equivalent to wrought. So the submissions have gotten a lot easier since our first submission. And there's not only clinical history with additive manufacturing, but there's also the manufacturing history and the records that they have, lot after lot after lot of tensile coals and oxygen tubes, and that you can go back and look historically at the records and show that it's an extremely stable process. I really think that it's the way to manufacture products. I don't think that we're going to be looking for opportunities to machine stuff unless it's very simple. But including additive manufacturing as an option allows you to think differently about the products that you're going to build, and in doing so, you can actually come up with novel designs, even in regions where there's a long history of use. So we're developing a knee partial knee system today. We have several patents, not on the additive process, but on what additive allowed us to do for the device. And so I think if you can get your engineers to think about the use of additive manufacturing and try to design with that in intent, I think you'll come up with some new novel designs.
I'd add too, it opens up, like Russ was alluding to, it opens up the possibilities. So the engineers can design what they need, and then they can come to a company like Paragon Medical that has a long history in subtractive machining, but now also additive, and say, what's your recommendation? And the team might take a look at it and say, this is a great fit for additive for these reasons, or, you know what, we can actually do this on traditional machining if we do this, this, and this. If you were to go to, just an additive manufacturing house, they'd say, yep, we can print it. But that doesn't necessarily give you the most cost-efficient option. So coming to a partner that has both, but also allowing the design team freedom to know that whatever they design, we will find a way to manufacture, really benefits the industry from a development perspective.
I think when it comes to like the development process, like if you're trying to convince engineers, show them the data. Even though we're developing an additively manufactured implant, we're still going to follow through with our verification activities. We're still going to robustly test the product. We're still going to do those non-negotiable activities. And I think our testing and our data shows that the implants that we're developing with 3D printing are new, novel, differentiated, but they're also having the same, structural stability, the same core, requirements are still being met of those traditionally machined devices. So it's not going to be the solution for every single device, but it opens up the opportunity to pursue those, new, novel, differentiated solutions on the continuum of care without the hindrance of worrying about the integration of the product.
Okay, so what excites you about the future of additive manufacturing?
I'm excited about all the different technologies that are starting to come to market. So yes, we have a lot of laser printers that, print a lot of Enhance, but we're also looking at different technologies like binder jet. We're seeing a lot of interest in single-use instrumentation and how to make that, as cheap as possible. So if you can print it in its, net shape that it needs to be off of a binder jet printer in 17.4 and send it into, final clean and sterile packaging and off to sterilization versus, needing to focus on the subtractive need for that. There's other technologies coming to market that don't require supports when you print. So you don't even have to worry about, the different support challenges that we had on Enhance. For me, that's what excites me, all of the opportunity for additional innovation within, the manufacturing method itself.
Yeah. I was going to say, leaning into that, I think I alluded to it earlier. I think 3D printing has been leveraged as like a prototyping tool, an early phase tool, and I'm really excited to see how that can transition as it's used as a primary manufacturing method, and a lot more suppliers, vendors, individuals have access to those production capable printers. I'm excited to see how that can affect the continuum of care and solving some differentiated unmet needs that we haven't been able to tackle just yet.
Same, Drew. I'm excited about the technology that's here today that's being underutilized. I think that just in the last decade, that additive manufacturing has proven itself as a standard manufacturing process, and I don't think that there are a lot of folks using that in their design process outside of spine. It seems spine's I got a lot of traction in additive manufacturing, but I think there's a lot of room to grow in the extremities market and hip and knee. So
Before we go, can you leave our audience with one piece of advice as they're thinking about either embarking in additive or going to design and manufacture their next product?
Yeah, I mean, back to the audience question, I think if you can just include additive manufacturing as a consideration up front, I think that you will design devices differently. You will think about adding features that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Hidden features, threads, components that would add a lot of cost if you were doing subtractive, or maybe not possible if you were doing subtractive engineering. So I think just considering that early in the design process, and then going back to you mentioned, just working with a supplier that understands the additive process and the subtractive process as well, further down the line, so that you can design your component to be built, in the correct orientation for the end of line processes.
Yeah. I mean, agreed with everything there. I think the other piece of advice, and I've kind of touched on it a little bit today, is as you see it go from that, to a primary manufacturing method, you just have to be open to adaptation and changing your way of thinking. And I think as you start to utilize 3D printing as a more primary means of manufacturing, just being open to those new technologies and adapting your processes or your procedures or your ways of development will go a long way.
Agreed with everything Russ and Drew said. I'd touch on, just making sure that your manufacturing partner has a seat at the table. Really, that helps speed up the time to market. I know Russ and Drew joked that at one point there were probably 80 people on the call, but in the very beginning, it was a very compact, very core team. And you didn't need to lead 80 people through the forest holding hands, blindfolded through this venture. It was 10 people working together on the same common goal, with healthy disagreement. But it's certainly much easier to have that compact, close collaboration team when learning something new together.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your insight. Hope you took some nuggets away that you can take back with you when you return to the office. We really appreciate your time today. And if this is a topic that's of interest to you as well, in 20 minutes there will be 3D printing with new materials discussion happening in this room. So thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.